The most damaged people you'll ever meet don't look damaged. They look like they've got it together, early to everything, never complaining. The friend who remembers your birthday and asks how your mom's surgery went. Here's the part almost everyone gets wrong. Some of your best traits aren't traits at all. They're wounds that learned to wear a nice outfit. By the end of this, you'll be able to look at your own habits, the ones you're maybe even proud of, and tell the difference between who you actually are and what you had to become to feel safe. There's a name for the thing running underneath all of it. I call it the survival blueprint. A set of rules a child writes to get through a world that didn't feel steady, and then never stops following. Welcome to Unspoken. From the outside, you look like the responsible one, the calm one, the person who doesn't need much and rarely falls apart. People call you low maintenance, easy, strong, and you've worn those words like they were compliments, but underneath the calm, there's a low hum that never quite switches off. A sense that you have to stay a little bit ready. Ready for what? You couldn't say. It isn't a thought, it's a posture. You feel it when someone's tone shifts half a degree. You feel it in the second of silence after you say something honest. Some part of you is always scanning, always checking, always braced for a door that might slam. And here's what nobody tells you. That bracing isn't a quirk of your personality. You weren't born tense. You were trained tense. Something taught you a long time ago that safety was conditional and could be taken back without warning. You've felt this. You just never had a name for it. So here's something you can use right now, before we go any deeper. A quick test for any habit you're not sure about. Ask yourself one question. Does this come from choice, or does it come from fear? Take planning ahead. If you plan the trip because you love the anticipation, that's choice. If you plan because the thought of not knowing makes your chest go tight, that's fear. Same behavior, completely different route. Or being generous. If you give because it genuinely delights you, choice. If you give because some quiet voice says people will leave the second you stop being useful, that's fear. The thing on the surface can look identical. The engine underneath is the tell. Run that test on 3 things you do this week and you'll start seeing it everywhere. But that's just the surface version. Because the real question isn't which habits come from fear. It's why your nervous system wrote these particular rules in the first place. That's the blueprint. And it goes much deeper. Let me show you what this actually looks like on an ordinary Tuesday. You're meeting friends at a restaurant you've never been to. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Simple. Except it's 11 at night and you're on your phone pulling up the menu, reading it top to bottom. You're not hungry. You're rehearsing. What you'll order if they're late. What you'll say if the table goes quiet. Where the bathroom probably is. You skim the reviews, not for the food, but to know what the room will feel like before you walk into it. To anyone watching, you look organized. Prepared. The reliable one who always knows the plan. But notice your body. Your shoulders are up near your ears. Your jaw is tight. You set the phone face down for a second and there it is, that flicker of something uncomfortable, so you flip it back over and keep scrolling. Because sitting in the not knowing feels almost unbearable, and you never learned why. Here's the thing, this was never about the restaurant. You're a grown adult, safe, with kind friends, running a program that a much younger version of you wrote in a house where surprises weren't the fun kind. The kid learned to prepare for everything so nothing could hurt them without warning. The adult inherited the code and forgot it was ever running. So where does this blueprint come from? 3 people help explain it, and once you see how their ideas stack, you can't unsee it. Start with a British pediatrician named Donald Winnicott. In the middle of the last century, he sat watching mothers and babies, and he noticed something. When a child's real feelings, the messy ones, the needy ones, the angry ones, are met with warmth, the child gets to keep their true self. But when those feelings are too much for the parents to hold, the child builds what Winnicott called a false self. A polished, agreeable, easy-to-love version designed to keep the caregiver close. And the false self is a mask that fits so well you forget you're wearing it. Then there's Bessel van der Kolk, who spent decades studying what trauma does to the body and boiled it down to one line that stuck. The body keeps the score. His point is that these early experiences don't sit in your memory as a story. They sit in your nervous system as a setting. A thermostat jumped on high alert. You don't remember the danger, you just feel permanently ready for it. And then Pete Walker, a therapist who named the piece most people miss. You know, fight, flight, and freeze. Walker gave us a fourth, fawn. Some kids, facing a threat they couldn't fight and couldn't flee, survived by pleasing, by becoming exactly what the dangerous person needed. By vanishing into agreement. Put the three of them together and the survival blueprint comes into focus. A false self to stay lovable. A nervous system stuck on ready. A reflex to appease. That's not a character flaw. That's brilliant, heartbreaking engineering by a child who had no other tools. And notice what none of these three researchers ever say. Not one of them calls the child weak, or broken, or too sensitive. They describe a small human doing something extraordinary, keeping themselves safe with the only materials they had. Hold on to that, because we're about to get very specific about how it shows up in you. Now here's where it gets personal, because the blueprint isn't one size fits all. It comes in 4 main versions, and most people are running 1 or 2 of them without ever clocking it. As I describe this, you're going to find yourself in at least 1. See which one lands. The first is the controller. This is the person who shows up 15 minutes early and keeps a backup plan for the backup plan. Who read the menu the night before, remember. Who can't sit still. Who fills every silence. Who would rather struggle alone for 6 hours than send one text asking for help. From the outside, it reads as competence, independence, drive. Underneath, it's hypervigilance in a good suit. The controller grew up somewhere unpredictable, where a mood could flip without warning and learned that if you just prepare hard enough and need no one, maybe nothing can blindside you. Control isn't a preference for them, it's the only thing that ever stood between them and the chaos. And the cruel joke is that the vigilance never actually delivers the peace it promises. The controller prepares for the disaster doesn't come, and instead of relief, there's just the next thing to prepare for. The list never ends, because the list was never really the point. Now watch closely, because the next one hides in plain sight, disguised as your best quality. The second is the Peacekeeper. This one walks into a room and feels the tension before a word is spoken. And then automatically they start adjusting, softening, getting smaller, checking whether they did something wrong. People call them empathetic, sensitive, emotionally intelligent. But this is Walker's phone response, grown up. The Peacekeeper was often the child who managed a parent's moods, who read the room to stay safe, who figured out early that agreeing was safer than being honest. So now they go along with things they don't believe, apologize for taking up space, and answer every real question with, "I'm fine with whatever." They're not naturally easygoing. They were trained into it by fear. And the exhausting part is that no one around them even knows there's a cost, because the whole skill is making it look effortless. The Peacekeeper can spend an entire dinner quietly managing everyone else's comfort and go home wondering why they feel so hollow. The third is the Minimizer. Ask the Minimizer how they are and you'll get, "Others have it so much worse. It wasn't that bad. I shouldn't complain." When something good happens, they wave it off. Oh, it was nothing. Anyone could have done that. From the outside, it looks like humility, like perspective. Underneath, it's a person who learned that their feelings were too much, or not important enough, or just inconvenient. So they stopped expressing them, then stopped admitting them, even to themselves. The Minimizer lives with a strange, low exhaustion, too much for some people and never quite enough for anyone, and they carry it around like it's simply their personality. It isn't. Here's the tale that gives the Minimizer away. Watch what happens when someone actually tries to comfort them. They squirm. They change the subject. Real care feels almost threatening because being seen in pain was never safe, so they'd rather stay the strong one who's always fine. And the fourth is the overgiver. The overgiver says yes when every cell means no, gives more than they get, goes out of their way for people who wouldn't cross the street for them. And somewhere in the back of the mind sits a quiet certainty. If I stopped being useful, they'd leave. This is love learned as a transaction. Growing up, affection came with conditions attached to achievement, to being the easy one, so they signed an invisible contract. I get to stay because of what I do, not who I am. They don't outsource their giving, they outsource their worth. And you can hear the contract in their resentment. The overgiver keeps a silent ledger nobody agreed to, and when the giving isn't returned in the same currency, they feel it, that quiet ache of doing so much and being seen so little. But they can't stop, because stopping would mean testing a fear too scary to test. What if I give nothing, and they leave anyway? Now, if you've been listening and quietly building a list of everything wrong with you, stop. Because you've got it backwards. Not one of these patterns is a defect. Every single one of them was, at some point, a solution. A genius move by a small person in an impossible spot. The controller's vigilance kept them a step ahead of the danger. The Peacekeeper's radar kept the peace when peace was survival. The minimizer's silence kept them from being a burden in a house that couldn't hold their feelings. The overgiver's usefulness kept them connected when connection felt like something you had to earn. These weren't weaknesses. They were the smartest options on the menu, chosen by a child doing the one thing children are built to do. Adapt. Your nervous system didn't malfunction. It worked. It did exactly the job it was handed, and it protected you well enough that you're here, right now, thinking about it. So, here's the line I want you to keep. The habit that's hurting you now once saved your life. Listen to that again. The reason these patterns are so stubborn, so hard to just drop, is that on some deep level, letting go of them still feels like letting go of safety. So, the goal was never to hate these parts of yourself. You don't fire the bodyguard who kept you alive. You just gently let him know the war is over and he's allowed to sit down. So, how do you actually start rewriting the blueprint? Not with some grand transformation, with 3 small moves. First, name it in the moment. The next time you catch yourself over-preparing, or apologizing for existing, or saying, "I'm fine" when you're the furthest thing from fine, put a quiet label on it. That's my blueprint talking. Naming it does something almost sneaky. It opens a sliver of space between you and the reflex, and in that sliver you suddenly have a choice you didn't have a second earlier. You can't change a pattern you can't see. Second, run the reality check. The blueprint was written for an old world, the house you grew up in. So ask, is that world still here? Is this restaurant actually a threat? Is this friend actually going to walk if I say no this once? Almost every time, the honest answer is no. The danger the rule was built for is years, sometimes decades, in the past. You're navigating today with a map of a country that doesn't exist anymore. Third, practice the opposite in one small dose. You don't tear your whole personality down on a Tuesday afternoon. You pick one tiny rep. The controller lets a single plan stay loose. The Peacekeeper says one small, honest no. The minimizer answers, "Actually, I'm having a rough week," and doesn't take it back 3 seconds later. The overgiver lets someone do them a favor without instantly repaying it. Every rep is a message to the nervous system. See? We did the scary thing, and nothing fell apart. That's how a blueprint gets rewritten, not in one cinematic breakthrough, in dozens of small, unglamorous moments where you choose the new thing and live through it. Here's what I keep coming back to. The fact that you can even see these patterns means you've already grown past the place that made them. A fish doesn't know it's in water. You noticing the water, questioning it, feeling something shift as I laid out those 4 blueprints, that is not a small thing. Most people spend an entire life inside the code and never once read a line of it. And there's something bigger sitting underneath this too. Every rule you rewrite is a rule you don't hand down. The vigilance, the phoning, the shrinking, the earning, these things move through families like an accent, passed quietly from one generation to the next without anyone deciding to pass them. When you do this work, you're not only softening your own life, you become the person in the line where it changes. Picture it. A version of you, or someone who comes after you, walking into a room without scanning it first. Saying no without the spike of fear. Being loved. Not for what they produce, but for simply showing up and being there. That's what's on the other side of this. Not a fixed person, a free one. And you don't have to get there today. You just have to catch one rule, one time, and choose differently. The child who wrote the blueprint did the best they could with a pen they were handed too young. The adult reading it now gets to pick up that pen and, gently, start writing something new. None of this happens overnight. But it starts exactly where you are right now, with recognizing the pattern and being a little kinder to the kid who wrote it. So tell me, which of the 4 are you? The controller, the peacekeeper, the minimizer, or the overgiver, or some blend of all of them? Put it in the comments. Somebody's going to read your words and feel a little less alone in their own. If this said something you've felt for years but could never quite name, subscribe and stay with us. This is Unspoken. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.